Okay, and now is Bernedette Muthien, who has become my friend over the last several years, and she's from South Africa, and we email each other a lot. Her speech is Egalitarianism and Nonviolence as a Gift of Life, the KhoeSan of Southern Africa, and Elsie of the Hessequa in the Overberg.
Yes. Okay. I was profoundly moved by, I've been profoundly moved by everything that's been happening, yes, before I came on arrival and ever since, and this morning in particular, from a great-grandmother, great as in a grandmother, Lucia, to Nina's presentation just now. She speaks with such profound poetry. She speaks my language, she speaks my feelings, my thoughts, my intuitions of my being. She speaks my politics, and I have held these experiences for a long time. So when she was standing up here and speaking about interconnectivity, etc., I was so deeply moved because it was as if I was speaking as well. I wanted to reflect on Paula's reference to the politics of vulnerability and the politics of fragility. And in South Africa, some of us have been working on what we call the politics of love, and some people tie the politics of love with the politics of courage, because it requires courage to be vulnerable, to show one's fragility, and to work through it and with it, and to acknowledge it. And in acknowledging one's fragility, there's a level of surrender that one of necessity has to engage with. And there is no greater time to grapple with these things than during times of intense transition and transformation. Some very painful and powerful transition and transformation from dying to birth, which is all part of the same cycles of life. So my presentation today is devoted to my sister who died a month ago. And now my PowerPoint does its own thing as technological. And as with Nina's work, I want to speak about the ideas of egalitarianism, which transcends equity or equality and other such notions, and nonviolence as both foundational and interdependent. And there are some mainstream scholars like Fry and Graham Kemp, whom I'm rather fond of, who've done work in peace studies, anthropology, etc., doing cross-country, multiple society studies on what makes societies less violent, both going through history to existing indigenous societies around the world, to social welfare societies in, for example, Scandinavia. And one of the key things is that these...
Okay.
All right. And one of the key things is that for these societies that are more egalitarian and less violent, is that it promotes of necessity diversity, and by its very nature it celebrates life. Frida, do you want to do what you need to do, please?
Sorry, I was just going to turn this. I was asked to move this.
Yeah, you can do it.
Sorry.
You satisfied? How easy it is to satisfy Frida, huh? I love you, Frida. So that diversity and the celebration of life is at its root as well. And as Nina said, community and an acknowledgement, a recognition of building up, a promotion, and a living of and through and within an etc. community, and the idea of interdependence is also at its very, very core. This is one way in which people like myself who engage with indigenous studies, and more particularly feminist indigenous studies, engage in our work. In a simple sort of a binary way, one can contrast it with the kind of polarizing binaries we're so familiar with, which is centered on othering, where the identity formation and pretty much everything else is centered self against other and so on. The construction of differences, etc., and the promotion thereof, and the imbalances that exist, and the exploitation, etc. And the idea that retribution and murder is also very key parts of these sorts of polarizing spaces. These spaces for me and for others, mainstream scholars on the occasion of this one and that one, is that it's centered on individuation, on ego, on notion of ego, and on alienation. And at its very core, all so-called modern, as in for the last few hundred years, fields of thought and the emphasis on thought rather than any other more whole ways of being, like philosophy, psychology, economics, and anthropology, they're all premised on these false dichotomies and these false notions of an individual. And I can't remember who spoke this morning, but several people have spoken about the idea that, whether it be clan or whether it be community, but that should be at the root, and is indeed for many, many people, like my own society, that is at the root of everything, rather than an idea, a more global north idea of a distinct mother, a distinct child, and distinct relations between these two. That is only two ways, one way and another way, rather than much more complex relations between all forms of being, both the human beings of all sizes, as in older and younger and in between, as well as the environments and the communities and the other beings with whom, of which they are an extraordinary part. In times of transition, when one is so aware of the infinity of all things, and if we could stay with that feeling more and more and more, rather than alienating ourselves from it, then the idea of individuation, the idea of one mother in distinction to another, one baby only in relation to one mother, etc., becomes, becomes more easy to understand why it's so difficult to accept. And in using decolonizing indigenous feminist methodologies, there's a very simple understandings of what I understand with it. It's merely, and I work with grassroots communities as well as people in academia. In terms of decolonizing it, it's nothing extraordinary. It's merely that people need to open their eyes and unshackle their minds, like Bob Marley's song, you can't free yourself until you free your mind. And in relation to indigenous, much like Nina had said, that people are local wherever you are from. And if your ancestors are not from there, for example, the Sami are the first people of parts of Europe, if not Europe, arguably. So if you're not Sami, then you must be from somewhere. And I don't know where you are from, but by Jove, you are from somewhere, and hence you are indigenous to some place. And people have migrated and done things with one another throughout time, some with consensus and some not. So for me, the key about decolonizing is whether one is working towards decolonizing, as in unshackling and freeing up and relating and being interconnected, or whether we are appropriating and recolonizing, in other words. And that's a critical issue for me in our endeavors as a community as well. And with feminist, I mean merely nothing extraordinary. I just mean that women is at the center. Women is at the center of our cosmology, as is indeed the KhoeSan, the first people of the world, of whom I'm in part descendant. And women are at the center of our analyses, at the center of our hearts, our minds, our beings. And the idea of a gift economy, for me, and for many like us, is so much a part of what we are, where we come from, and what we continue to experience. And it's, as Genevieve says, it's more, it's way beyond the idea of a narrow system of economics as we understand in terms of mainstream scholarship, but it's a system, it's practices that we've had throughout time. I've been asking for the last few years whether people have words or terms or concepts or understandings of what we call, some of us call Ubuntu, which is a notion of such profound interconnectedness that my being a person or a being is entirely because of my connection with other beings, with other people. And this notion of Ubuntu is prevalent in all languages, in all places I've discovered, and it's so profound that that the idea that I can't be happy if someone like my beloved friend Frida is, for example, unhappy or sad, then even if I'm on a high, like I've just gotten a candy bar for free, and then I can't possibly be happy for myself without relating to Frida's sadness and supporting her through her sadness and vice versa. My humanity is affirmed through my connection with other beings. Working with Barbara Ellis-Mann and other people, we found many times in many native societies. And the interesting thing is that even old John Donne, the metaphysical poet, we were tortured with as undergraduate English students. He, in one of his meditations, he says that no man is an island entirely of itself. So even deep in patriarchy, there is a notion of this Ubuntu. The people of which I'm descended, the Khoi, which European anthropologists have called Khoi, which is human, is a duplication. What's that thing called? Human, when you do that. In fact, it's not. It's less human, and more a person of people. I am because I belong, and because I'm part of a community. And we practice this notion of Quenya, or the gift, as a matter of course. We don't think about it. It's just what we do and what we've grown up with and what we always have done. And as Wangu from Kenya said, it's how people survive on $1 a day. What I've struggled to do is, in my work, in doing participatory research deliberately, in addition to literary analyses, has been to record the stories of grandmothers who are dying from their 70s to their 90s, and they take their stories and their wisdoms with them. And I go to deserts and other places where I engage with these grandmothers. What we have not found, we have obviously found stories, beautiful, profound stories of goddesses and women's strength and courage throughout time, goddesses that move mountains, fascinating, beautiful reclamations of the power of the feminine in the stories of these grandmothers in these deep, rural, very impoverished spaces. But we haven't had an archival historic record, colonial record of a woman leader from my people in ways that, for example, Barbara Ellis-Mann's Iroquois have such strong, powerful stories of women leaders and matriarchy. And when I encountered along Elsie of the Hessequa, it's a place 2.5 hours outside of Cape Town, I was overjoyed, and I felt that I was driven. The colonials call leaders, native leaders, they call them captains, which is shall we not go into the ways in which captains are derogatory as opposed to the word we prefer to use and continue to use, which is community leader. And this Lang Elsie, which is a tall, Elsie Lang means tall, she must have been a very interesting, imposing person. She lived in what is now a national park, in a large part of a national park, and in the other part of the national park lived another male leader with his community, and there is no record of any trouble between them, or any trouble between them and anybody else. They lived in great peace because there was complete and utter abundance in the 1700s, and the structure of her community is extraordinarily beautiful and powerful. There remains stone remnants of the village or the kraal where her people live on a high up sort of spot where they could see everything forever, with views, 360 degrees views, incredibly powerful and beautiful views. And the colonials write that they put the reed huts, rudimentary reed huts, in the middle of the stone dwellings, and I don't know how many of us who live in Western style stone dwellings go and put little reed huts in the middle of them. So this is one of many different ways in which people have been writing about my people in the most appalling ways. But so we lived in stone dwellings. And I'll show you a couple of photographs in a moment. The ways in which it's set up is all with due attention and in the most powerful ways to geometry and sacred geometry. The location, further down is a large open piece of land where the cattle were kept, and just a little bit over this side is another dwelling, also made of stone, still very solid after all this time, and the entrance of Lang Elsie's dwelling faces east. The mountains are there, and pyramidal peaks, etc. So with powerful attention to water, direction, and sacred geometry. But the graves have been destroyed, and reclaiming the record of Lang Elsie is very, very difficult. How much time? Cool. The little buck is sitting in the middle of this small section of the vast expanse, which is where the animals graze. And underneath is some stone remnants in the middle of dense bush. And I don't know whether people can see, but there are two parts where there's insets in the stone. And I have no idea what the insets were, whether it is decorative, what the purpose of the holes in the walls deliberately placed in beautiful and powerful ways are. And that's the water, the source of water as the river runs through, and that's the view that Lang Elsie has as she exits her dwelling, her stone dwelling. And in the distance is the first peak, and then on the right of it is the